Everybody, this is Alex Kahaya, and this is the first episode of Van by the River. It's a podcast about the intersection of technology, human rights, privacy, and democracy. This is a set of topics that I really care about, and today we're going to be talking about our election systems. Now, you might hear some background noise from vehicles going by, and that is because I am actually working in my van, not by a river, but actually by the Pacific Ocean. I'll move the camera here so you can see out the window. That is the Pacific Ocean here in Santa Barbara. It's not a bad place to work, but definitely is a result of COVID-19 and having to work from home. Today we're going to focus on a subject that I care a lot about, our election systems. And specifically, I want to talk to you guys about open source election systems. So today, the market for election systems in general is completely broken. It consists of 3 vendors in the United States. There are Election Systems and Software, Dominion Voting Systems, and Hart InterCivic. These 3 companies together own just over 92% of the market, and they control the market completely in their respective regions. And the problem with this is that these companies are owned primarily by private equity firms with, at best, opaque ownership within those firms. And there are some known ties between these companies and Russian and Chinese entities. Now, given what's happened in the past years, both in 2016, 2004, 2000 with our election systems, and the known insecurities around the software and the hardware that is run on these systems, having ownership that ties back to Russia and China is clearly not a good thing for the United States. And we've recently seen even lots of instances of inaccurate or voter counts or discrepancies in our elections that are making eroding the integrity of our election system. So in my latest article in my newsletter, I've done a detailed analysis that I think can go a lot deeper, but a rather detailed analysis of the entire market and the need for an open source system. Like I said, there are definitely a few instances that we can go through just briefly. In 2004, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wrote an article about some election discrepancies that you should take a look at. More recently, the governor's election in 2018 for the Republican governor who won, Jeff Duncan, in Georgia, there were hundreds of thousands of votes that went uncounted, and there were clear discrepancies where, in some counties, 100% of the vote went Republican, which is just unheard of. If you look back towards the 2016 election, there's lots of data on this, of the differences between the poll numbers and what the actual vote ended up being. Clearly shows that there was some kind of error or some kind of hacking or something like that happened. Beyond this, it's just bad practice to have closed source voting systems implemented throughout our country, because what closed source means is that all the software that's running on those devices and all the firmware as well is a black box. We actually don't know what is going on there, or if it's actually secure, or if it's even the software that the vendor thinks it is, because these systems are trivial to hack. You can just walk up to one of these machines with a USB drive or a memory card and stick it into the machine and compromise everything that's happening there. And unfortunately, there are some sizable barriers to entry for any newcomer into the market. It's expensive to build these systems. There's limited funding. So back in 2000, when we had the debacle in Florida with the recount, the government released a lot of money in something called HAVA for funding election systems, and that money allowed states and counties to purchase and procure systems from the vendors that I just listed off. But that money quickly dried up, and it's been up until this year, up until 2020, there was no additional funding, or not much additional funding, released by the federal government to support modernizing and maintaining these election systems. So over the years, they've become obsolete, and many are falling apart, with elections officials even resorting to eBay to find parts and things like that they would need. So what is this thing called open source? For those of you guys who don't know what open source is, it means that you license the software in such a way, the license is actually called AGPL v3. You license the software in such a way that it is free for anyone to use who has the skills and the will to use it, and they can customize it in any way that they want, improve it. The only catch is that if they make any improvements, they must commit those improvements back to the core technology. And essentially, open source software is owned by the people. It's public software, and something as critical as an election system should be publicly owned by the people. And some other things that are really good about open source election systems is that they're transparent. So true open source systems should be developed in the wild, so to speak, so that every commit, every line of code that is written is pushed up to the cloud for anyone else to see, and is easily audible. And then it should also be verifiable, so you can verify that this process to develop it was actually done in the right way, and that the software is actually accurate, and that the outcomes are actually accurate. And then it should be secure, and because it's publicly available and you can go and look at the code, anyone here could do it. Anyone with the skills to audit it can audit it and verify whether or not it's secure. If we had a end-to-end open source election system today, it would be much less expensive for a county or a state to utilize that software. They would just have to find a technology firm, an IT consultant, or someone to help them deploy and maintain and customize that software in their jurisdiction. And they could do that much cheaper than they can with the current vendors, the closed source vendors. And because there hasn't been more funding in the space, and because of the regulatory barriers around certification of these systems, and because the three main players have so much capital and so much political clout, none of them have been really incentivized to modernize or improve their product. And so if you talk to just about any election official, they'll tell you that these tools are not what they want. They are desperate for another solution. But luckily, there is a movement, a growing movement of people, activists, engineers, entrepreneurs, government officials who are really pushing for open source elections systems to be built. From what I know, Los Angeles County and San Francisco County are the two places that are leading the way. Unfortunately, in LA, they funded an open source system to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, but failed to actually assign a license. There are many different open source licenses. They've actually not licensed the software yet, and they're claiming that they're waiting to figure out which one is best. But the fact that they haven't licensed it and the code, to my knowledge, is not in the open means that it is not open source actually. And this is a project that was funded to the tune of hundreds, I think tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And another issue with their software and the technology they built is that it had its first real real life test in the most recent primary in 2020 in California, and it completely failed. So they had many problems actually with the deployment of the software in the field. And luckily, I and others that I know some of the people that are in charge of that in LA, and we're trying to work to see if we can help them patch things up so that it can be deployed successfully for the presidential election this year. Now, San Francisco is a different story. They've been working for years to scope out and define an end-to-end open source election system. By end-to-end, I mean it has all the modules that you would need to actually run an election. And they have some great people on their elections commission, some great people in the Department of Technology working to figure out how to fund and develop this system. And so if LA and or San Francisco are successful, it will really pave the way for us as a community to actually have an open source election system that can be used anywhere in the United States. You can see here at the bottom of the article, I've mapped out a few other projects in the space that are open source voting projects in the space, or people trying to build open source election systems. And you've got one here called OSET, which is a pretty well-funded project with about 60 people. Voter Information Project. You've got some ranked choice voting projects. You have one that's actually a results reporter, which is part of the Technology Advisory Council for San Francisco. OpenCount, VotingWorks, Gallios. Gallios is really interesting. This is one by this company, Gallios, got a contract, $10 million contract from DARPA to build secured hardware for voting, which is very much needed project. Prime 3, this is a project by Dr. Juan Gilbert, and it's, to my knowledge, the only open source elections system or part of a system that is being used out in the wild and is certified. And then there's Election Guard, which is a Microsoft project. I've also linked in below to a bunch of resources that I used for all this research. And I hope that this was helpful to you and informative. And I wanted to just leave you with the inspiration for the name Van by the River. I thank my friend Brian for giving me that. But thought it was pretty fun. If you're familiar with this SNL skit with Matt Foley, Van by the River.
All right, how's everybody? Good, good, good. Now, as your father probably told you, my name is Matt Foley, and I am a motivational speaker. Now, let's get started by letting me give you a little bit of a scenario of what my life is all about. First off, I am 35 years old, I am divorced, and I live in a van down by the river.
So, I'm 33, I'm happily married with a beautiful wife and daughter, and I do spend a lot of time in my van, but I thought this was pretty fun, and I think the van is going to be a great place for me to create content and explore ideas, and especially explore these topics that I care so much about, and hopefully you find this podcast informative and educational, and feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm on Twitter at AFKEHAYA, that's at AFKahaya, or just hit me up on my blog on Substack, so that's vanbytheriver.substack.com or vanbytheriver.co. We'll redirect you there.